In this episode of B.Hooked Crochet, we're going to play with a brand new yarn from Red Heart, Collage, while we work the Snuggle Up scarf. This is a free pattern that's available from their website. You can search for Snuggle Up Scarf at redheart.com and get your pattern there, or you can access it from the link in the description below. I'm your host, Brittany, and I'm really excited about this project because not only do we get to use a new yarn, but it works up really, really fast with our Q hook. So grab your supplies, download your free pattern, and let's get started. We're going to begin our scarves with a slip knot. Now this loop on our hook doesn't count as our first chain. We want to go ahead and make 16 chains to start off the length of our scarf. So once we have our foundation chain, it's important to understand the type of stitch pattern that we're working with, so that way we can work a little bit easier and not have to rely on the pattern so much. So we're going to be working with a shell stitch pattern, and this particular pattern has a 2-row pattern repeat. We're going to cover 4 here because we have to have 2 setup rows to get the initial thing started, and then we have a long repeated section as we work the length of the scarf. So the first thing that we want to do is find our 4th chain from the hook. It's really easy with this super chunky yarn. We'll just count 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is our 4th chain from the hook. We're going to double crochet 2 times into that chain. And now you can either work in the side loop and the back bump, so you're catching 2 of those loops, or you can just work in the back bump only, whatever you're comfortable with. I tend to like to work in the back bump only. And we're going to double crochet 2 times into that chain. Now this is going to count as 3 double crochets. So this is sort of a half shell on the side of our work. It's going to help to keep our edges nice and straight. So now we skip down to that 4th chain, and that leaves us with 3 chains here that's acting as a double crochet. Now the next thing we're going to do is skip 2 chains and single crochet in the next. So I'm looking at the back bumps here. I have 1 chain and 2 chains. I'm going to skip those, and I'm going to single crochet in the 3rd. Now I'm going to skip 1 chain, skip 2 chains, and double crochet 5 times into the 3rd. This is going to be a big shell stitch here. Now you don't want to put too much pressure on your chain. You'll see that this is really going to open up, so we don't want to have too much of a hole. There's really not a whole lot you can do to avoid that, but it will sort of work itself out as we finish up this row. So now we're going to skip 2 more chains and single crochet in the next. And these single crochets are really acting as little anchors for the shell stitch. So if we look at it from here, we have the big shell that's fanning outward, and we have each end of that a single crochet sort of tying it all down. Now we're going to skip 2 more chains, and we're going to make 3 double crochets in the last. These 3 double crochets here at the end are mirroring the other side where we had those 3 double crochets at the beginning, well, one of them was a chain, and then 2 more double crochets. So this is a half shell. And that wraps up row number 1. To begin round 2, we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. And what we need to do for this row is fill in the space in between the shells. So we have our full shell here, our half shell, and our half shell on each side. And then it sort of goes down into this little valley area on either side. Well, we want to fill that gap. Now this chain 1 does not count as our first stitch for this row. We're going to make our first stitch a single crochet in that first stitch that's available. So it's the last double crochet from the previous row right here. And now we need to fill this gap here. So we're going to do that with a double crochet 5 together. But before we do that, we need to chain 2. Now we're going to find the next stitch that's available and start our double crochet 5 together. We're going to yarn over, insert our hook into that next stitch. I've got both of those loops. Yarn over and pull up a loop, and yarn over and pull through 2. Now we're going to leave things here. Now typically if we were working a regular double crochet, we would go ahead and yarn over and pull through 2, and that would finish the stitch off. But we want to work 5 of these together, so we're going to keep that loop there and work that again in the next stitch. So now I have all of the double crochets from this half shell are covered, and I'm moving into now the single crochet that's in between them. I'm going to work that same sequence there. And now moving on to the big shell that's in the middle of the scarf, I want to work that over the first 2 double crochets of that shell. And that's going to account for all 5 that we're working together. Now when you get finished with that, this is what your work will look like. You'll have 6 loops on your hook. This first one is from that single crochet, or where those 2 chains were at the very beginning. And then you'll have 5 loops for each of the 5 double crochets. And then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 6 loops. And that's going to pull everything together. And then we'll chain 2. So this chain 2 is going to help to close off the stitch like you see there, but it's also going to help us get into a better position. Since we're working over a pretty big distance here, we need to have these chains to get us to the proper place. So we had the 2 chains at the beginning to help us get to the middle of this stitch. Now we have the chain 2 that's going to help us get to the next stitch that's available to work into. We're going to single crochet there. Now we're going to make 2 chains again, because we're preparing to do a double crochet 5 together, and we're going to work that over the next 5 stitches. Now when we do that, that's going to get us to the end of our row, but we can't end things here. First of all, we need to finish our stitch, our double crochet 5 together. So yarn over and pull through all 6 loops and chain 2. And then we want to locate the 3rd chain from the beginning here. So this is our chain 3 from the very beginning. We're just going to single crochet in that top chain. Now I like to catch 2 of those loops to keep it nice and secure. we'll single crochet there, and that finishes row number 2. To begin row number 3, we're going to chain 3, and turn our work. And this time we're going to work something similar to our first row. We want to have a half shell at the beginning, then we'll have a big shell here in the middle, and then a half shell on the other side. So we're going to start that by making 2 more double crochets in the same stitch where our chain 3 is coming from. So that chain 3 is acting as a double crochet. And then we can skip to where we see our double crochet 5 together. I'm going to make a single crochet there. And then I'm going to skip over again until I see the single crochet. So I've got the 2 chains there. We're not doing anything with those. I want to find the single crochet and make 5 double crochets there. This is going to be the big shell in the middle. Then once you finish that shell, then you should be right next to your double crochet 5 together. You see that little ring there? We're going to make a single crochet there. And the last thing we need to do is make a half shell. So that's 3 double crochets in the last stitch. Now this is the single crochet. We can find that right here. We're going to make 3 double crochets there. At the end of row number 3, our scarves now look something like this. We're coming on to a large repeated section, and all we need to do is repeat rows 2 and 3 until our scarf measures about 72 inches long, or you can make adjustments here if you want it shorter or longer. So row number 2 is where we worked the double crochet 5 together, and row number 3 is where we had the shells. So just always remember that the 2 repeats are just to get the shells, filling in all of those gaps. So we had our initial row that we're not really counting because it sort of acts as our foundation. Then we have the double crochet 5 together that is filling the gap in between the little half shells. And then we have a row where we do a half shell, a full shell, and a half shell. So moving forward, we would work row number 2 next. That's where we would start with a single crochet, and then we would work the double crochet 5 together to fill in this gap here. We'll single crochet, then work our group of 5 double crochets to fill in this gap. And we're just going to repeat those 2 rows over and over. So rows 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 and so on. Once you've worked up the length of your scarf, the last thing we'll talk about is where you should stop in your repeat when you're ready to fasten off. And then there's some fringe that we'll add onto the ends. So go ahead and work up the length of your scarf, and then we'll talk about those finishing touches next. Once you've worked up the length of your scarf and it measures the length that either you prefer or 72 inches as given in the written instructions, then we can go ahead and fasten off. Now the instructions don't tell you exactly which row you should go ahead and stop on. I found that if you stop after a row 2, we have a nice straight edge. That's going to help us to add the tassels here to the end. So we can go ahead and trim a tail. Leave yourself about 8 to 10 inches. That'll allow you to weave that in. And then you'll just pull the tail through the loop on your hook. Now what we want to do is weave in all of our ends on the wrong side of the scarf. So we can figure that out because the second row, that is the right side of the work, and that's what I have here. So I finished a row 2, that part is facing me, so I know that this is the right side of the scarf. So I'm just going to flip it over and weave in my ends along the back side here. Now I'd like to find a nice section of dense stitches. So right here where I have the double crochet 5 together, that's where I'm going to get my end situated to there. And then I just want to work my darning needle under as many of those stitches as I can. And if you can only do a couple stitches at a time, it's no big deal. These stitches are much larger than normal. So work under a few stitches going in one direction, and then turn around and go the other direction. Now you want to leave a loop so you don't undo what you just did. And the other little trick is the messier you are about this, the better. It's actually going to help your ends stay in if you're not trying to go directly underneath one of the loops. If you sort of split the yarn, that's going to help it to stay in place even more. And once you have that nice and secure, you can go ahead and trim it off, and you're going to have several ends to weave in throughout the scarf. Go ahead and finish that up, and the last thing we'll talk about is adding the fringe. The last thing we want to do is make 44 cuts of yarn that are 25 inches long. We're going to group them in twos, and we're going to use these as the fringe on either side of our scarf. So you'll take your two ends and fold them in half so that the ends are about the same. And I'm working on the foundation chain side right now. I feel like this is a little bit more difficult than working into the stitches that we see on the other side. I'm going to work this into just the first foundation chain, putting my hook in there, and then just loop your two strands on your hook just to pull it through. Now we can go ahead and grab the two ends and just pull it through that big loop and pull that nice and tight. Now we're going to have 11 pieces of fringe, 11 little tassels on each side of the scarf. Once you have all of your tassels secure, then what I would recommend doing is just trimming them all so that the ends are the same length. Once you have that done, your scarves are all complete.